Now I'd like to bring on our CEO, Geoff Green. Geoff is the Chief Executive Officer of CalNonprofits, and we're happy to have him here introducing our panelists and giving us a rundown on the current state of the sector.
Great. Thank you, Robert. Welcome, everyone. Lovely to have you all here with us today. Many of you have been members and engaged with CalNonprofits over the years, but for those who haven't, I just want to take a moment to tell you a little bit about who we are, what we do, and maybe a bit specifically about why we're doing this now. So CalNonprofits is an organization founded 40 years ago as a resource and advocate for the nonprofit sector across the state of California. We have a wide range of membership benefits that people find us to access. We also happen to own an insurance brokerage for nonprofits, which is another way that folks find us. And over the past decade, we've been building our political power and footprint in the state capital, also in the nation's capital, working alongside other states, to try to advocate for the best possible landscape for our nonprofit sector. We unapologetically believe that the nonprofit sector is the heart and soul of our communities. I believe firmly that if you want to know what a community needs, go look at what the nonprofits that have been birthed out of that community might be, and that's your answer right there. That's what a community believes in, what we invest in, and what we advocate for. So with that in mind, we are here to bring folks together to provide a link between nonprofits working in various subsectors and to provide a voice politically at the state level in particular, to make sure that we are supported to do our work the best way possible. There are really three things that we do. One is advocacy, and that's the policy and advocacy work that we do. We have done a range of things over this last decade, from helping to create 2 select committees in the nonprofit sector in both houses of our legislature here in California. We have also created a Nonprofits Day where legislators are asked to simply lift up and celebrate a nonprofit, and I know some of you are here today that have been recognized in that way. We have also worked with the state to pass bills that actually remove barriers to the interactions between government and the nonprofit sector, as well as bolster the advocacy for nonprofit organizations and the work that they do across the state. And finally, we have our education program. That is what this is a part of, and oftentimes we're translating what policy changes in the state house might mean to the field and to leaders on the ground. In other cases, it's really more just to share some good resources, and typically we try to do both, and that's what we're going to do a bit today. And then we do some data and research of our own, but we are often pushing out what we see as good, strong data and research work done across the sector, and that happens frequently. We do have one in particular that I still claim is one of the best things that this organization has done, and that was Causes Count. We're working on a new edition of that for 2025, really making the claim that we are not only nice people solving problems, but we are a massive economic force. And that's one more reason that the legislators, rulemakers, and elected leaders of our state and nation need to hear what we have to say. Oftentimes, nonprofit leaders are the ones that know best from their work on the ground what the actual challenges of our communities are. So no matter what issue you're working on, that's what we're here to do. To look a little bit about what we're going to do today and what we're talking about, I don't have to tell anyone here that we're in a new and different time, even than 6-8 weeks ago. We knew that with the return of the Trump administration to Washington, D.C., that things would be different. I think one of the pieces of that difference, though, that has been startling for many is the direct targeting of the sector as a whole. We are used to budget fights. We are used to having to make arguments for our values against those that might oppose or feel differently about them. But in this moment, we're seeing something that's a bit new, and that is the wholesale targeting and calling out of the nonprofit sector as something that we do not see ourselves as, and that we are not. But that would be any number of, well, let's just say bad words, critiques. But what we are here to do is defend the values that we stand firmly for and the things that we advocate for. One of the challenges we find in the nonprofit sector is that we rarely act as or see ourselves as a single sector, because really what we have in common is a tax status. Beyond that, we work on everything from gender equity to climate. We work on rescuing animals, to education, to health, to child care, to racial equity. You name it, we're doing it, and that's often the things that are either not done or poorly done by other sectors, whether it be for-profit or public. So In that spirit, we're gathering here to talk about this new landscape that we operate in. And since the 20th of January, we've seen a flurry of executive orders, nearing 100 now. And some of those are directly relevant to our nonprofit sector. I want to say, in the spirit of what we're going to address today, that the idea of cybersecurity, protecting your data, using digital tools in a way that is responsible and simultaneously helps our constituencies and those that we work on behalf of and with, and protects information that we hold in privacy, that is a long-standing challenge. That's a challenge that's as old as the cyber world itself. What is different now is that we have a moment where government appears to be allowing folks that are part of that direct targeting of the sector into places that they did not previously have access. And so we are not only looking at just good operational advice, in which we've invited some fabulous experts here to share with us about how to do this work well and what to be aware of, and this thing that can feel something like an arms race in sort of digital tools and how we use them, and how bad actors who are targeting the folks that we're supporting or our organizations itself might use them. But also what we need to be aware of in this moment around protecting the communities that we serve. So that's what we're here to talk about today. We're going to take it from several angles. The good news along this path, and I always am looking for the bright spots, is that our nonprofit communities, our statewide advocates, as well as our national advocate and National Council of Nonprofits, had acted very quickly in January to protect and protect our communities and counter the actions of the administration that were harmful to us. And the good news is that at a court and legal level, we are on the winning side time after time. The challenge is that courts move at a particular pace, and it's much easier to break things and cause problems than it is to clean up. So we are in this moment where we are trying to do everything we can using the legal tools that we have, as well as the political power that we have. And we are facing a challenge that is really something on a scale that many have not had to engage in before. So we want to give you the tools that you need. We want to make sure we all have access to the best information. And in that spirit, we have an incredible group of speakers and presenters today. So we are going to hear from three folks. We're going to hear from Ian Gottsman, who's the CEO of NGO Information Sharing Analysis Center. We're going to hear from Bill Buddington, who is the Senior Staff Technologist for the EFF, our Electronic Frontier Foundation organization many know. And then Lauren Klein, who is the Director of Advocacy for the Legal Aid Association of California. And many people know their legal aid organizations in their community. And like us, they are affiliated through state and national networks as well. So three great speakers, a lot of information. I'm going to get myself out of the way here and bring Mr. Gottsman on. Ian is going to start us off with his presentation. And I want to thank you all again for being here. Thank you to our fabulous presenters. And on we go.
Thank you, guys. Hopefully everybody can hear and see me. It's exciting to see about 170 people on the call and see people from all over the country and all over California. Go to the next slide. We're going to talk about kind of three broad things today, and it's going to be a little bit of a race. So hopefully we can cover all this. Record retention, which is a way to reduce your risk surface, and it's a way to kind of stop lawfare and fix some cybersecurity issues. We'll talk about that in a little bit of detail. The three most important things you can do for cybersecurity, which is identity management, patching, and phishing, and I'll talk about that, and then Bill will as well, I believe, cover some of the same stuff. And just a little bit about my organization, the NGO ISAC. If anybody wants to join, we're happy to have you as a member. So, and then some time for questions, hopefully, if I can smush it all into half an hour. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so why do you need a record retention policy? Or it's because it lowers your reduces your risk surface. So just like this sort of crazy juggling knife person I found on open source data images, it kind of, most of our email and our messages are just transitory. They serve no purpose once they're read one time, but yet they're stored in perpetuity in many cases. People send and say really unfortunate things in email and messages that you do not want laying around to be found. Those unfortunate things, like this person juggling a knife, which seems pretty unfortunate to me, can cause reputational harm, can make contracts really complicated, especially if you're having a dispute, or can be worse. Next slide. So just some ideas of the sort of things you see. So very common you see in the hacking world is sort of hacking and compromise, which is a Russian idea that doesn't really have a direct translation in English, but where you take embarrassing information and you publish it out, and then you use that to sort of shame or embarrass the organization. Happens a lot in Russia. It happened in the 2016 political campaign. And then Sony, when that happened a few years ago, I guess it was about 8 years ago, where they ended up having a lot of people losing their jobs over the silly things they said in email or worse things they said in email. Um, e-discovery and lawsuits. So a lot of you are in organizations where maybe you have a lawsuit or one of your board members does something like that. They will request a whole bunch of emails and messages as part of that process. The most common example that I found when I was doing this report was the Blake Lively, Justin Baldini thing, where like they were just amazingly nasty and stupid things people were saying in text messages about each other that are now, on the front cover of magazines and New York Times and stuff. And then lawfare, which is kind of what brought this to the fore around this presentation. The idea that you might be called in front of like a congressional committee or uh, administrative action, and then have any discovery requests made, and then embarrassing stuff comes out, which is what happened to the Harvard University president, and then she ended up losing her job over some of that response to that. And this is the most common that I've seen in my career and in other places, sort of tangential exposure. Like you have someone on your board or senior staff member in your organization, and they are involved in one of these three other things, maybe not even in the role that they have in your organization, but they're like on the board and they are in an organization that's gotten sued, or they're in an organization that is required, like they're a sitting member of state or federal government, and they're required to provide all of their messaging and emails, and then that stuff comes out to embarrass you when it's requested. Next slide. So next slide. Uh, just an idea of mitigating this risk. And this is a picture of a hurricane in Florida, where I'm from originally. And then one person built an amazing house that could withstand a hurricane, that managed a Hurricane 5 to stand up, and the other 80% of the block did not. So if you can sort of manage that risk and manage that idea, you'll be able to withstand that hurricane, hopefully. So you want to develop a policy regarding information record retention that strikes a balance between getting rid of old stuff as soon as possible, but keeping things that help you keep your institutional memory and the things you're legally required. So the first thing you do is just decide what the default is for all the information that doesn't fall in any other category. So like in some organizations have a very high concern about this, and they don't want to keep things around that can be as short as 2 weeks. I've heard of labor organizations doing that, where they are constantly suing people, so they just delete all their emails. They sue people for violating labor rights. Some places it's 6 months. The most common is probably 13 months, because then that gives you a little more than a year. But some places are longer, 5 years, whatever. It depends on your organization. Um, you decide what the default is going to be, and then you make exemptions to that. You want to get support of your senior leadership for that, so that it's not just like some person in IT sort of arbitrarily deciding, oh, we're going to have 13 months, and they start announcing it and rolling out the policy, and then you're very unpopular and people are chasing you around with pitchforks. So the people that should be helping you make this decision are people that are managing that information and managing risk. So maybe if you have a lawyer or general counsel on staff, people like your chief operating officer or finance director that are helping manage your finance information, HR, things like that. A lot of this is more about operations staff and less about program staff. And because it's the records that are required to store are more operational and fundraising related. And then the IT team's role in this is mostly to enable the policy and advise and make sure the policy can actually work, so the policy as written can be carried out using the tools you have. Next slide. So the retention period is based on the type of information in the document. Generally, the sender is irrelevant. The biggest exemption to that is if you have someone on your board or someone in your organization who's an elected official. Typically, all of their information is open to the public by federal or state law. So you may be required to save that. The policy usually says who's responsible for storing information, what information they're responsible for storing. And then the storage method usually isn't determined by policy, but in some organizations and in some policies it can be. Next slide. So the IT team, which is kind of the groups I work most closely with, are responsible for making sure the information can be deleted on the agreed upon schedule, making sure that end users can follow the policy. So for example, if you are in the CFO's office or the finance director's office and you have to keep financial records for 7 years, you should be able to store in an email or wherever you want in 7 years. What can't be deleted automatically, you need to make sure that the content creator or author, whatever you want to call it, owner, can go in and manually delete things. A lot of times with like your file shares, like your Google Drives or OneDrive or SharePoint, the tools are not as easy as with email to delete things automatically. So you may have to do that manually. And then a very important message is if you've had a record retention request, an e-discovery request, but you were just busy and not didn't get around to doing your record retention, it's too late. Like if you start deleting emails after you've been requested to provide them, that is going to be a resume spawning event, as one of my colleagues put it, and could get you in a lot of trouble. So you have to stop at that point and revisit your record retention policy when that incident is over. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so I have some sample policies that are linked here. I'm not sure if we can open those or not. But there's 3 different sample policies in a copy of this presentation. Yeah, if you want to click on that, that's perfect. Should open up a Google Doc, I think, if I remember correctly. This is a sample policy from the Association for CPAs. Yeah, you can see I kind of tweaked it a little. This policy is, you can scroll down if you want. This policy sort of lays out who is responsible for it. In this case, they have like an individual person or individual organization, like an archivist. I've worked in organizations that have libraries and archives, and they would be responsible. And then if you keep going, this is the important part to the bottom. Keep going, keep going. There's like a list of, keep going. There's a list of things that have to be kept for a certain amount of time and who and where they're kept or how they're kept. Keep going. That's kind of what I'm looking for. There's like a table. Perfect. Stop right there. So you can see this list is what the minimum requirement of how long you want to keep documents for. This is really the important thing. So you're making sure you're not deleting things that are legally required to or you want for operational purposes. So tax records, banks records, HR records, those sorts of things have pretty clear operational needs, and some of them have legal requirements to keep them, like your tax records, 7 years for audits, fundraising records, that sort of stuff. So a table like this that lays that out is really important. And then that exempt things from your standard 13 months, which I think was in this policy. There's another sample policy which is very similar. The only difference is, or the biggest difference is, if you go down, you'll see a similar table. It has who is responsible for storing it, which department. This is probably a little more common because in most cases you don't have like an individual organization or person in your organization, like a library, that would store things. You would have like your finance office is responsible for storing accounts receivable, your HR office for HR, your fundraising development team for grants and proposals. So there's 2 sample policies there that you guys can use. You just need to tweak it for your own organization, but that is helpful, and I think it'll get you a good head start. And we have links to it in the presentation. But the big thing is you would need someone to just review those exemptions, like how long you want to keep the HR records for and stuff. Some of them have very strong and clear legal requirements, like 7 years for your tax records is a minimum for audits and things. Some of them, it's organizational preference. There may be a minimum amount of time you want to keep it, like for a job opening until till the job is fulfilled or something, or 90 days after if it's filled, and then you can delete all the old ones, but you may want to delete it, keep it for longer and delete it in a year, let's say, or something. It just depends on the legal requirements or the minimum, so you can go beyond them if you like. All right, we can head back to the very exciting slide presentation. So what's important, I think what's the hardest thing about this is just the rollout and the communications with your colleagues, particularly from an IT perspective. This is what happened to me when I tried to delete my colleagues' emails, or not delete, but have a record retention where emails are going to be automatically deleted. They came after me with dogs and pitchforks, or it could be a scene from Frankenstein. I'm not sure which. People really, really love email. No matter how many dumb things you read about people doing an email and how much trouble they've gotten in an email, they really love it and will continue to use it. Deleting email can make you very unpopular. So if you have a policy, a record retention policy, you're going to be deleting email or messages, make sure that you have a lot of support institutionally. If you are sort of from the IT perspective, which is mostly what I'm speaking from, if you're going to be deleting emails or deleting messages, you need to answer people's questions, make sure that they are clear what they're doing and who has responsibility for what, but make sure that you continue to do it and don't provide exemption because it's very hard if this person is following the rules and this person isn't. And then people may really be unhappy with you. So that's why it's important to get some senior leadership help so you can absorb some of that risk and some of that ire. So next slide. So just real basic kind of IT project management to think about. And this is a standard process I've used in a lot in IT rollouts of projects. So try and create like a committee that can help you with the proof of concept or testing or whatever you want to call it. And it kind of goes across your whole organization. Some senior leadership is important. People that manage risk. So like if you have a general counsel or a CFO or finance director, someone who can help from those offices can help. Subject matter experts. So like people from your programs that maybe have interest or expertise in whatever the area is, in this case, record retention. Squeaky wheels and early adopters, those are important. So early adopters are people that sometimes as an IT person can make your life very difficult or very easy because they're the ones that are like bringing in all the new tools that nobody else has and trying to get you to use them at work, which can be great if the tool works really well and is got secure and meets the needs of your organizations. It can be a real pain in your bottom if it's just one more thing for you to manage and then now all your data is in another place. And then squeaky wheels, obviously, it's easier to have people who are going to help you kind of complain internally and help you figure things out than like shouting from the outside and saying they aren't going to do it. Things you can do with your test group is just test out the actual technology, right? If you want things to delete automatically in a week or a month or a day, have them be the first ones to do it and make sure it actually works. Have them kind of gain some expertise and meet with you a few times and go over your documentation so they can help other colleagues in their area because they'll be an expert and they can answer questions. And then they can build internal support. And then they can test not just the technology, which is important for a technology project like this, but they can test some of the messaging, the rollout strategy, the timeline, lots of different things. And that's a strategy I use a lot in rolling out for anything really, but it's really good for technology in particular. Next slide. So like this person from the 1980s who's, I think, smoking a cigarette, drinking coffee, which is off screen, filming a video, and then having a conversation on a very large old cell phone. Gotta kind of be like an octopus managing a lot of different things. So you want to define a rollout timeline, remind people about it a lot, announce the rollout well in advance, remind people about it again and again. If people are just can't meet the deadline or you don't have any pressing need, be okay to extend the deadline. That's always somewhere you have some flexibility typically, but more so than save money often in a nonprofit. And then remind people about it. If you're going to be using Outlook or an email client on their computer, not like a web browser, as you delete a bunch of emails, it can slow your computer down to a grinding halt. So you may want to, like, for example, have people leave their computers on overnight when the first night you do it, and then have Outlook churn through and delete everything. Next slide. So that's really about record retention. Now we're just kind of giving you a quick 1, 2, 3 on cybersecurity. So 3 things to really manage. Manage your identity, like your username and password. Make sure your stuff is patched and up to date, and then avoid phishing. JAWS there. Next slide. So 80% of cybersecurity problems come from credential harvesting, phishing, or exploiting vulnerabilities. This is from the Verizon annual report on cybersecurity. So if you can manage those 3 things we just talked about, that'll reduce your risk by 80%, which is a lot. Next slide. Identity management. So think about your identity management and your password is like toothbrush, unique, not to be reused, not to be shared, and changed when used. Someone told me that a long time ago, and it stuck with me. Next slide. We have hundreds of passwords we're trying to manage. It is very, very hard for them to be unique and not reused and all those things. So password managers help you do that. They can be free. Nord VPN is free. If Nord provides a grant for VPN and their password tool for free to nonprofits, you just apply for it. They can, Bitwarden is open source and free. Even quote unquote expensive ones are only about $20 a year. There's personal ones and professional ones, and the professional ones are business class ones. will like allow you to manage different team members, and people can segment out their personal and their professional passwords there and share them. So there's different sort of options, but definitely recommend them. And there's a few different open source options too if you want something free. Next slide. The biggest thing for cybersecurity and identity management is multi-factor authentication. That's sort of the vaccines or antibiotics of cybersecurity. It really cures a lot of things. It is a little bit of a pain to have to enter in a number or confirm that it's you, but it makes cybersecurity much more secure. Next slide. So a lot of different ways to set up multi-factor authentication. 2FAdirectory.org or .directory has a list of how you can do it for just about every service you can imagine. This is a list of the most from least secure to most secure for multi-factor authentication. So the least secure option is probably email followed by text and voice. You particularly don't want to use text while you're traveling. SMS, regular text, is not encrypted or secured at all, so it's very easy to intercept. Time-based passwords, which are the ones where the numbers change. You could have a 6-digit number typically, but sometimes it's words or 9 digits or something. Those are pretty common and hard to intercept, but you can do that. Hardware tokens like YubiKeys are the most secure of sort of the what we'll call legacy options. And you can get YubiKeys for free for a lot of nonprofits. There's a link here to apply through their free paths. And YubiKeys are like physical keys you put into the computer, and they kind of look like keys to go on your keychain. They have a USB or a near-field communication the same sort of way your ID or credit card can go over a computer or like a credit card thing. And then passkeys are the most modern way to do it. That's fine. Stay where you are. Passkeys are the most modern way to do it, and that you don't enter a password. It uses biometrics from your phone or your computer to log you in. Here's just a big laundry list of things to click on for different tools that we thought maybe would be helpful. Or you can go to 2FA directory and drill down and find stuff. Next slide. All right, patch your stuff. Patch everything all the time and automate it. That's kind of the logo here. But try and have an inventory and a list of what you're doing. More sophisticated devices like phones and laptops will have what they call mobile device management software, where you can sort of manage them remotely and push out patches manually if you want to, but you don't have to do that. Um, just make sure if you do that you have things automated and turned on. Don't forget about things like Internet of Device, things like light bulbs and TVs and stuff. Displays, a lot of things with smart in the title other than maybe what you were called in school. At least I was called in school. Those things also are connecting to the internet and have software and hardware that need updated. So try and figure out, can you update them? And then is it useful for your thermostat to be connected to the internet? If not, why do you want to go through the time and the effort of maintaining it and running updates and whatever else you have to do? Maybe you just want a light bulb or a thermostat and you don't need it to connect to the internet. And try and have a list of what you're defending, like an inventory, and figure out patching to be automated as much as possible. Next slide. So just a real simple 1, 2, 3, 4 kind of idea. Identify what you have, apply updates to it, verify the updates are running, monitor for new updates, and then go back and do this all over again. Next slide. All right, avoiding phishing. So we're all are familiar with phishing at this point. There's a lot of different versions of it, but getting a text or an email saying you have a package from Amazon and asking for Amazon information is totally kind of ubiquitous and aimed at a million different people. Spear phishing, where maybe someone knows a little about you, or a lot in some cases, and has sent you a text or an email. Like almost everyone I've talked to, when they have new employees at their organization, suddenly they're starting to get text from someone pretending to be their boss or the CEO, asking them to buy iTunes gift cards. And then whaling, which is going after high profile targets that maybe have a lot of monetary value, like people that have cryptocurrency have this happen to them a lot, or high political or information relevance, and they just really target and narrow something in to that specific individual by studying them closely and try and get into their systems. And even, really rich, powerful, famous people fall for these things. Like, I don't know if you remember, but a couple years ago, Jeff Bezos's phone was hacked through a phishing exploit in WhatsApp. Next slide. So the most common type of fraud in the internet is what's called phishing, is run through phishing, called business email compromise. So you really want to be careful on looking at emails. So think about examining the address where things come from, the actual, not just the name, but the full email address. So, is it actually coming from, this is request for your Amazon information actually coming from Amazon, or is it coming from Amazon@outlook.com? And clearly shouldn't be provided. When you're asked to apply for sensitive information, particularly things that are monetary or changing bills is a really common one. Double check that it's working. Check that you're going to a legitimate place by making a phone call or making a Google search to see if it's the right information. Be aware of things like misspellings, non-corporate addresses, odd extensions for big companies, and be particularly careful when verifying information with financial stuff or like changing a deposit or check information. That's really the most common form of BEC, business email compromise. And something as simple as just taking 5 minutes to make a phone call to the organization that you're paying for printing or delivering or whatever can save you and the organization a lot of time and effort and struggle of like sending a check to the wrong place, having to call the FBI to see if you can recover the check, all of those kind of things. Next slide. So these are some stats from the FBI from 2023. It was $2.9 billion that they tracked, and there's a lot more that they're not seeing, and 21,000 incidents. It's something like 10 times the amount of money of ransomware, which gets a lot more attention, and like 100,000 times the number of incidents. Most common kinds of BEC are like invoice fraud from a vendor, updates to a bank account that aren't legitimate, either from a vendor or also you see it if internally, like someone will pretend to be a new staff member or a existing staff member and ask them to get their direct deposit changed. Fake requests from C-level employees to entry-level employees, especially new entry-level employees for like things that can be easily changed or used into money and not recovered. CISA has a lot of information for nonprofits, organizations, and high-risk information that includes information on BEC, and so does the FBI. And you can contact your FBI office, and they'll help you recover stuff if you can do it within 72 hours. I just saw a presentation by them. They said they can get it back with 85% certainty. So the IC3 email will help you do that. And if you ever have any questions, we do have a contact at the FBI that we can help you with. Next slide. All right, so a little bit about us. I hope I'm not running out of time. We are the Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is kind of an idea that started about 25 years ago in the financial sector for nonprofits, for the NGOs. We are sector specific. We ask that organizations generally be a 501c3. Occasionally we'll have other types of organizations like a C6, but we mostly work with US-based nonprofits, or if you're an international nonprofit, you need to have a US EIN number so we can double check who you are. We have a community of about 320 organizations. That includes peer member organizations like nonprofits. It also includes some vendor partner organizations, big tech companies and little tech companies you haven't heard of. We have a weekly briefing series, an annual in-person conference. We help provide low-cost, no-cost tools and then guidance and support to answer questions like this. Next slide. If you want to join, you can email me from this, or you can click on the NGO ISAC website and just click the join link. We're here to help you, and just please, take cybersecurity seriously. It's not the funnest thing in the world, but it's not the most boring either. You just need to kind of take this stuff seriously to help protect your own information, your clients' information, protect the financial security of your organization. I think next slide. Yep, that's it. I raced through this. I think I did it in like 25 or 28 minutes, something like that. So I'm happy to answer any questions if you have any, or let you go on to the next section.
Thank you so much, Ian. I think we're going to keep rolling. A lot of great advice there. The sample policies, thank you for that. And just a reminder, I saw a few questions. Yes, we will continue to share these materials after the webinar, as we always do. So everyone here will get a chance to see some of those links. So thank you very much. Outstanding advice for folks. And now, with more outstanding advice, I'm happy to bring Bill Buddington on from Electronic Frontiers Foundation to talk about some of those basics and building blocks for how we get to put together a good system. All yours, Bill.
Thanks, Jeff, and thank you, Ian. The Electronic Frontier Foundation, just as a introduction to the organization, is a 501c3 nonprofit based in the San Francisco Bay Area. I'm currently transmitting from the Sierra Nevada mountains. We comprise a three main teams. And the teams are activists who fight against bad legislation, technologists like myself, who develop technologies and present with our research and give trainings such as this, and lawyers who, well, we currently are suing DOGE and the OPM for disclosing a bunch of personal information about public sector employees. So yeah, well, we've been in the fight for 20 or no, 35 years now. Founded in 1990, and we're happy to be here. Next slide, please. Oh, and if you want to email me with any questions and follow-ups, bill@eff.org is my email address. Be happy to, and also happy to do follow-up trainings, local Californian. So first we want to kind of do this process of risk assessment. We're presenting a lot of information all at once, and it can be a lot and intimidating to absorb. So what we want to do is to kind of take a step back and ask ourselves some broad questions about our risks in this process called risk assessment. It's also called threat modeling in some circles. So next slide. So yeah, risk assessment is going through this process of, asking ourselves some hard questions about our cybersecurity. What is the chance that a threat to our organization or personal might succeed? Do you know how much cost we're willing to put into defending against that possibility? And what are the risks that are involved in losing that information, or it being divulged to the public, or to potential adversaries, ransomware actors and the like. And so those are some of the kind of basic bread and butter calculation of what we want to be defending against. Next slide. Next. So it's data is in this calculation what we want to protect, right? And as any kind of information, typically when we're talking about here is data stored in digital form. That might include our communications. It might include documents, possibly, the organizational infrastructure details, things like that, are some of those assets. Next. And what is a threat to that data is potential adversaries and threats that are undermining your efforts to defend that data, to actually keep it safe. Next. And so what is going to happen if that data is actually compromised, and what happens if the threat is successful in getting that data? So that's what is this idea of the risk. Likelihood of threat will actually have success in compromising that data. Next. And what we're talking about here is, usually the core amount of data that, say comprises a communication between two people. But we also want to keep in mind that there's metadata associated with any communication. So what is metadata? Metadata is some of the surrounding information, not the core contents of a message, but some of the surrounding information about a message, like who sent it, possibly where they sent it from, include IP address, or your unique identifier on the internet, where they send it from, when they sent that message, and who they sent it to. These are things that aren't the actual contents of the message, but are associated data that is called metadata. And the process of encryption will take the data, the core data, and make it unreadable, so that only the intended recipient can actually read that data, right? It may not protect the metadata. And we'll go into a little bit how certain apps might protect the metadata around the message contents. Next. So, okay, in traditional HTTP world, before web encryption was commonplace, when you sent a message, particularly like Ian was mentioning, SMS, then that goes over a cell phone tower or goes to a data center, and everyone can see that you are trying to get coffee with your friend at a certain time. And that can, be compromising information if someone is targeting you or your organization, or perhaps a private investigator is looking to gather information about you and track your whereabouts, etc. These are all kind of potential risks, and that might not apply to your nonprofit, but it might. It might be as simple as some details about your email server that are communicated by a non-secure channel, and that could be divulged to a ransomware actor or other cyber threat. So those traditional HTTP before encryption was widespread world, this was sent to every chain along the internet infrastructure before it got to its intended recipient. Next slide. So with end-to-end encryption, we have this possibility of making sure that the message is in this garbled form until it gets to the very person that we're trying to communicate with. And that protects against, the cyber criminal that might have access to the cellular network. We just learned a few months ago that AT&T and the messages that were stored in AT&T servers were compromised. So cyber criminals were sitting on that. We know about different cyber attacks that have been perpetrated by Chinese affiliated actors, like Salt Typhoon and the like, and those have been sitting on infrastructure that was built out as part of the ability for law enforcement to tap our communications, and then the cyber criminals use that infrastructure that was built out to tap us by the government to compromise our communications in turn. So using end-to-end communications will protect against that. It'll protect against, say, the private investigator, say a law enforcement, someone that is an infrastructure worker at a data center, for instance, and government snoops, etc. And that will make it so that all these pieces along the chain are not potential sites of compromise, of data compromise for you. Next slide. Yeah, but it might not protect against this kind of metadata problem. It depends on what we're talking about, what communication platform we're talking about. Traditionally, there had been the suggestion to use what's called pretty good protection, PGP, in email. We don't really recommend that anymore because it's overly complicated, and a lot of it does not actually protect against this metadata from being divulged. Next slide. So, again, what is metadata? It's kind of like the name and address that's on the envelope, and then the contents that are put into the envelope are protected by encryption. And then what traditional encryption apps would do was protect that data pretty well. Next slide. So going through this kind of this exercise of risk assessment, we can kind of do this outside of the digital sphere first. Say like something as simple as protecting a bicycle. What do I want to protect that bicycle, from potential thieves, actually even just, the rain, myself. I want to protect my bicycle against me forgetting the key, right? And that's an important kind of part of this risk assessment. What is how am I an adversary to my own data that I'm trying to protect? That could be, for instance, forgetting, in this analogy, forgetting the master password for my password database. And that could be devastating for an organization. So you want to keep in mind, sometimes the threat comes, the call is coming from inside the house, kind of thing. What are the consequences if I fail? Well, if I forget my own password, then I don't have access to those resources. But if someone else is able to compromise the organization, you might not have an opportunity to ride the bike. You can't get somewhere where you need to in time. How likely is that threat to happen? Is my particular block or neighborhood a site of burglaries? Is my those that are around me that are visiting me, are they trustworthy, etc. And then what are the costs associated with actually trying to protect that resource? Could think about costs in terms of buying a lock for the bike, not taking outside. It's also a matter of the cost in time investment as well. How much time do I want to take to investigate like one lock versus another, or I know one lock is good and I just go with that. Next slide. So, there are certain key terms that are associated with each of these. So the data that I want to protect is called an asset. What I'm protected from, adversaries, and what are the consequences if I fail. There's a risks, and how likely is this threat. So next slide. So we can kind of graph on the vertical axis the risk of likelihood of an event occurring, and then the threat, the consequences of that on the horizontal scale. And so say like the one particularly low risk event, but semi-likely or not very likely to happen, is a high profile protest against this particularly jewelry store. That is something that is somewhat likely to happen, but it poses a medium threat. You have a very likely to happen employee misplaces their key, but it doesn't have that bad of a consequence. Might, depending on your building layout, etc. But you kind of want to think about these things on a scale of, risk, risk on one axis, the threat of it happening on another, and then maybe the third axis is the cost. And then like plot out those things and keep those things in mind and try to tackle the lowest cost thing, is a low-hanging fruit to kind of try to get your organization up to speed with digital security. Next. So what are those low-hanging fruit typically? Organizations, Ian covered this, phishing is a big one. And that relies on what's called the social engineering attack. That means that it is not really a technological problem, it's a social problem. People aren't aware of the fact that, this email that I get that looks legitimate, that's asking for a one-time password, could be coming from someone that isn't actually the service I'm trying to log into, for instance. So in order to tackle those for an organization, if you're a well-resourced organization, you might actually want to invest in organizational training against phishing. So there are some organizations that are out there that can come in and really kind of hone your skills on how to identify those kind of red flags when it comes to phishing attempts. Say looking at a domain that doesn't appear to be associated with the site they're trying to log into. Well, that's kind of a red flag there. When we have phishing emails that are very well crafted, that actually embed the EFF logo and then have something that says click on this. And you mentioned other attempts, like every organization having like this CEO reaching out to you, trying to ask you to buy them an Amazon gift card. So as a leader in your organization, you can just let people know, hey, I'm never going to reach out to you to ask you to get an Amazon gift card for me. Like, it would be nice, but I'm never going to do that. So that's kind of raising that organizational awareness. If you are not well resourced and can't hire an expert to come in and do a specific phishing training for you, you can simply have these handouts in the office, or make sure that everyone looks at these handouts. Just spend maybe 45 minutes to an hour to print out a bunch of these, and then have people get together at your organization and talk about, oh yeah, I did see something like that. And those conversations can go a long way in protecting from phishing attempts. Next slide. Another low-hanging fruit is password reuse. Ian talked about password managers, and this is instead of a kind of social solution, this does rely on a technical solution. You don't want to be choosing the same password for every service, because that means that you're protected only by the weakest link in the chain. One site that gets compromised with their usernames and passwords leaked to the dark web, say, then those logins are attempted by hackers and can lead to much larger compromise if you're reusing those passwords in other places. So what you want to do, and one-time passwords, will protect against this to some degree, but you want to choose a good password manager, and those will every single password manager out there will have the feature of generating a random password for a specific site that you are accessing. How they may differ is certain criteria. If they have a history of breaches, some password managers have a history of breaches. You might not want to invest in those. There might be actually monetary costs associated with a password manager, and might offer organizational discounts for nonprofits as well. You might want to look into those offerings. If you just Google or use your search engine of choice and look up password managers 2025, then you'll see just a bunch of sites out there that are comparing different password managers based on these different criteria. Syncing across multiple devices is often an important one for organizations as well. Having a shared password manager in your infrastructure that syncs across members and gives some access controls to allow some passwords to some teams and not others. Keeping those credentials separated is also a good practice. And there might be extra features bundled with a specific password manager. I think NordVPN, or Nord has a VPN as well as a password manager. I know there are some others, like Dashlane, I think also has a VPN associated. So there are a number of good ones out there, and you'll want to kind of look into those comparisons and see based on these different criteria. Next. Yeah, and then just communicating insecurely is another low-hanging fruit that you can pretty easily protect against by organizationally, often organizational mandates to use some encrypted protocol. That metadata that I was talking about, that is protected by something like Signal. Signal was by court order forced to divulge information about a user in the Eastern District of Virginia. They were sued about a user who was on their services, and they gave all that they were mandated. They were mandated to give everything. They gave all they had, which was the last time that user logged in and when they created their account, and nothing else. They didn't have who they communicated with, what time they sent messages. Even these are pieces of metadata, so they were encrypting the messages, but end to end. But they were also making sure that metadata wasn't compromised or wasn't stored. So again, speaking to Ian's point, that data retention policy and not having the data stored actually is a way to protect that data. That said, there may be side channels. So even if you are using a highly secure encrypted communication app, then that doesn't protect you from say what's called endpoint compromise, where your device is compromised. This isn't often a high risk for nonprofits because when this happens, it's often costly for those that employ it to for its risk of detection. But it may be something of concern if you are dealing with high profile communities or acting as a lawyer for high profile targets. Yeah, and just kind of drive home that the best protections for your organization are actually pretty good digital security practices in general, using Signal, using a good password manager, and that ups the that kind of inoculation that you might have against some of those threats. Next. Yeah, and a lot of this kind of relies on choosing a good password, master password. So password managers, you are forced to enter a password one that is secure, that you remember in order to have access to all the rest of them. Just to kind of go through a little bit of what a good password means, it is not what people typically think of as a good password. This kind of troubadour &3 example in the first panel of this comic illustrates a bad password because it's very easy for a password cracker, something that is trying to attempt to brute force or to go through all the passwords and compromise that password. It's very easy for it to try all the different permutations of a single word. But what is way vastly just mathematically better is choosing 4 separate different words. And it could be as simple as going into a book and choosing the word. There's more complicated processes, which I'm happy to talk to you about in email. But I think I'm running out of time. So they're just having 4 random words that are chosen in order to protect your password manager, say, is good in terms of not it's hard for a computer to guess, and it's also hard. It's also easy for us as humans, they're storytellers, our brains, to kind of create a story about that password. This random password correct horse battery staple is an example of that in this comic. Next slide. Yeah, just to my slides are available at this URL here, but we'll make those available at the end as well. Some resources that you might want to look at are SSD or surveillance self-defense guides at ssd.eff.org. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Bill. Thank you also for your legal advocacy. We really appreciate EFF being at the forefront on that, pushing back against some of the privacy violations happening right now at a federal level. And I have to say, correct horse battery staple is now a part of my lexicon. So I think I'm going to use that as like a band name in the not too distant future. But really appreciate all the resources. Now, last but certainly not least, one of our allies in advocacy, Lauren Klein with Legal Aid Association of California, is going to talk a bit about that advocacy. So stage is yours, Lauren. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Klein. I'm the Director of Advocacy at the Legal Aid Association of California. You can go to the next slide. I'll tell you briefly who we are, just to give you some context. Not unlike CalNonprofits, we are a statewide association of nonprofit organizations, but specifically legal aid organizations. So those nonprofits that provide free civil legal services to folks in their communities. So what we do for those organizations, there's a little over 100 members that we have. We do a number of things, including coordinating them, training them, and my wheelhouse is advocating for them. We like to speak on behalf of that whole community, to do things like get more funding for legal aid nonprofits, and to advocate for better laws and policies for nonprofit organizations. Next slide. So we did some advocacy recently around data security that I'm going to tell you about. Hopefully it will give you some ideas or some inspiration about similar advocacy that you could do. Why we decided to take this on at this time was that our advocacy priorities are completely driven by what our member organizations need. We listen to what is worrying them and we try to help them with the problems. So data security is something that had been on our members' minds always, but more so in recent months. There were real threats and breaches that were becoming more common. This was especially true for organizations that work in the immigration space. We were seeing a lot of phishing attempts happening. We heard about some organizations facing phishing that was folks disguising themselves as potential donors wanting to give money to an organization and getting in that way. But there's also been a lot of hacking that has happened, like I said, especially in the immigration space. I know of an organization that serves a lot of Russian asylum seekers, and they were hacked by some Russian hackers. Similarly, an organization that does a lot of Chinese asylum cases was breached by some Chinese hackers. But these organizations, by virtue of the fact that they're providing legal services, often hold a lot of sensitive information about their clients. And so it's very important to them to figure out how they can beef up their data security. So in addition to this becoming more and more common lately, organizations were also very interested in preparing for anticipated threats post-inauguration. So like Jeff said at the top, nonprofits are kind of in the crosshairs. It's making a lot of people nervous. Our members wanted to make sure that they were able to protect their clients and their staff and to make them feel safe going into 2025. Next slide. In terms of how we approach this advocacy, we went through our normal advocacy channels where we always do our advocacy work. One of those main places is the California State Legislature. So we did some work there, specifically in the special session of the legislature that was called by the governor in November. But we also did a little bit of advocacy at the State Bar of California. We regularly advocate at the State Bar and at the Judicial Council of California, which are both administrative type agencies that do a lot of funding and regulating of our members. So we went to what we know. We don't know a lot about data security. I'm not an expert on this, but what we do know is how to advocate for more funding and to advocate with funders. That's really the core of our work. So the way we thought about this was organizations are concerned about data security. Perhaps we can advocate to give them the resources to address those worries. So we focused on getting funding for organizations to do this work. There's a lot of work that organizations needed to do, some more than others. If you want to work on creating a record retention policy or pay for a password manager, or most importantly, train staff, that takes time and resources. So we knew that that would be really important. And I think the staff training piece is really critical. I know that Bill just mentioned that as well, but I know organizations where even just implementing a new password manager with two-factor authentication, just like Bill and Ian recommended, took a lot of staff training. They had to train staff on how to use it, and they even required all staff to come to office hours one by one to make sure that they were using the password manager correctly, that they weren't also storing passwords on their browser. And it was tedious, took some time, but ultimately it was worth it. Next slide. Lastly, I'll get to the headline and tell you what we were able to do. We were able to get some funding to support data security upgrades. We advocated for a whole funding package during the special session of the legislature that Governor Newsom called in November. He specifically called this session so that the legislature could appropriate some funds to help California prepare for when Trump took office. Initially, he was interested in funding just the Attorney General, but we ultimately convinced him that other things were important, like legal services to individuals. So it was a $25 million budget package, but that included $10 million in competitive grants. Some of the other grants were formula grants or money that went through already existing channels, but there was a piece for competitive grants where data security was highlighted as a priority issue and as certainly an allowable use of those funds. So that gave all of our members a place where they could apply for funding to do this work. The other bit of advocacy that we did was with, as I mentioned, the State Bar of California, a major funder and regulator of legal aid. And that was around the data that they were collecting and reporting. So like I said, these organizations hold a lot of sensitive information about their clients. And in addition to making sure that their security was beefed up, they wanted to figure out if they really had to have all of that sensitive information. Specifically, some of the pieces of information that folks were worried about were immigration status, which is something they were collecting about a lot of their clients, and LGBT plus status. And those are pieces of info they were worried about getting out. And of course, organizations collect this information so they can use it in their own way to evaluate their programs, improve how they're serving their community. But a lot of it is also driven by funders and what information funders request. So we just appealed directly to the funder and said, is there any way you could not ask for these specific demographics? And the funder quickly agreed and did not require all of the grantees to submit that information. So that was another way that we helped organizations feel more secure coming into 2025. And a big takeaway that I wanted to highlight from this advocacy is that the advocacy was well received, whether it was with the state bar or the legislature. We didn't really get any pushback from folks saying, I don't think this is a concern for nonprofits right now. People got it, and it seemed like a valid cause to them, which made our work a little easier. So if you're looking to advocate with a funder or someone else around these issues, I think that now is a time when that issue will be appreciated and understood. And that is all I've got, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And thanks so much for our panelists to join us. We do have just a little bit of time, a couple of minutes for some questions that I do still see here in the chat. Really appreciate Ian and Bill and Lauren going through and answering the questions as they were arising. But there is a question here from Jeremy, and that is best advice for a longstanding nonprofit with newly emerging IT devoted lines of work and activities with a team of one. Any advice there from any of the panelists that they might be able to provide?
I can try if you want, Robert. Without a lot of specifics, I mean, I think you need to, if IT is becoming sort of your programmatic delivery area or area of expertise, you just need to provide the same level of service that you do in anything else, and the same sort of service level agreements that you have with, I don't know if you're a legal aid clinic with your legal aid, and I don't know if you're doing it online, and don't worry too much about the different tool. It's just another service you're offering, and you want to make sure that it works, and that you can answer the questions and meet the need that you've been asked to meet.
That's great. One more question here is that, and this is probably a question that some other folks have in their minds as well. Are there any recommendations or subscriptions for antivirus that work for both Macs and Windows? Is there a difference there that we need to be worried or concerned about?
Hi there. Yeah. I'm of the opinion that the best practice is to have some of those habits in mind to avoid compromise in the first place, right? There are good antivirus solutions out there. I'm happy to kind of talk about those. I think that they differ from platform to platform, but I think the best defense is to avoid compromise in the first place, because it's really hard to clean your system once it has been infected properly. Like, to clean it properly is a really difficult process, and half the time antivirus is not even detecting it, let alone cleaning it. And one thing that I recommend is separate devices for separate purposes. If you're using, one device for just email work and then basic browsing, and then downloading apps on a separate device, then there's no possibility of cross-contamination.
That's great.
So yeah.
And our final question is, are words that are non-English languages stronger than English language words for passwords?
I guess I could take that one as well. I think that the most important, I mean, it might be good to have words in different languages, because mathematically just increases the amount of possibilities of like what your password might be, which makes it harder for hacking tool to compromise. But I think that the most important thing is that it's actually random. You're choosing something that you take a book and flip through the pages and then randomly choose 3 or 4 words that are in the book. And if it's then choose another word maybe. But yeah.
Well, great. I want to thank everyone for joining us today, and particularly give a big thank you to our panelists, Ian, Bill, and Lauren. This was a jam-packed session with lots of information that I think was very helpful for folks. I want to remind everyone that everyone who attended today or registered for the webinar will be receiving a copy of the webinar recording, as well as the slides and the resources that our panelists referenced. I also want to highlight a couple of upcoming events from CalNonprofits in the same vein here. So on Thursday, March 13th at 11 a.m., we have Good Standing, Keeping Up with California's Nonprofit Reporting Requirements. And this is from our partners at NEO. And then on Wednesday, March 26th at 11 a.m., we have Beginning and Endings, Essential HR Tips for Nonprofits. Both really wonderful and important webinars that we're happy to provide for you in the coming weeks. So once again, thank you so much to everyone who joined today. We look forward to hosting you at future CalNonprofit events, and have a great afternoon, and feel free to reach out to us. We're always happy to hear from you and look forward to answering any questions that you have and that we can answer in the coming days. So thanks so much. Have a great afternoon, everyone. Take care. Bye-bye.